The psychological poverty trap. Based on The Psychological Consequences of Poverty, Introduction, The Dinner Table Dilemma. We have all found ourselves in that familiar, slightly uncomfortable scenario. You are at an extended family gathering, perhaps a holiday dinner or a birthday celebration for an elderly relative like Great Aunt Mildred. You are seated next to a distant relative. Let's call him Uncle George. As the evening wears on and the wine flows a bit too freely, Uncle George leans in, his inhibitions lowered, and offers a piece of unsolicited philosophical wisdom. With the confidence of a man on his 10th glass of Merlot, he declares, "You know, money doesn't buy happiness." For a social scientist, this moment is particularly agonizing. It is an exercise in biting one's tongue. However, the next time an Uncle George figures in your life and drops this cliché, you should feel empowered to tell him with scientific certainty that he is wrong. There are two compelling reasons to engage in this debate. The first, naturally, is the petty satisfaction of winning a dinner table argument. But the second, and far more critical reason, is the global reality of human suffering. There are still approximately 1 billion people in the world living in abject poverty. These are individuals who lack the basic resources to feed their families, pay for health care, or educate their children. Solving this problem is urgent, and understanding the relationship between money, psychology, and happiness is not just academic trivia. It is a crucial first step toward eradicating global poverty. The scientific approach. Randomized controlled trials. Over the past few decades, the field of development economics has undergone a revolution. We have moved away from relying solely on intuition or macroeconomic theory and have embraced the rigorous methodology of the hard sciences, the randomized control trial, RCT. RCTs in social science operate much like clinical trials in medicine. Researchers partner with organizations to test a specific poverty alleviation intervention. They identify a population and randomly assign individuals to a treatment group who receive the intervention and a control group who do not. By comparing these two groups over time, economists can make rigorous, mathematically sound statements about what works and what does not. This data-driven approach has yielded surprising results, particularly regarding education in developing countries. Education is a silver bullet for development. Children who go to school earn more as adults and live healthier lives. So, if you had $100 to spend on increasing school attendance, how should you spend it? Direct cash. If you simply gave that $100 to poor families, you would buy about an extra week of school attendance per child. Conditional cash. If you promised families the money only if they sent their children to school, a traditional incentive model, you would get about 3 extra weeks of attendance. Information. Surprisingly, the most effective intervention cost the least. By simply providing parents with accurate data about the long-term financial returns of education, information that parents often underestimate, researchers achieved an extra 3 months of school attendance for every $100 spent. This finding is profound. The information intervention didn't change the macroeconomic climate. It didn't build roads or end corruption. It operated entirely within the human mind. It changed how parents thought. This suggests that small psychological nudges can have massive economic impacts. It compels us to ask a deeper question. Does poverty itself have a distinct psychology? The hypothesis, a psychological poverty trap. This line of inquiry leads us to the concept of a psychological poverty trap. The theory posits a vicious feedback loop consisting of two main components. The consequence. Poverty leads to negative psychological states, such as stress, depression, anxiety, and unhappiness. The cause. These psychological burdens, in turn, affect economic decision-making. For example, reducing patience, lowering cognitive bandwidth, making it harder for individuals to escape poverty. Before diving into the evidence, two crucial caveats must be established. First, exploring this psychology is not an exercise in blaming the poor. It does not suggest that poor people are intrinsically deficient or responsible for their plight. On the contrary, it suggests that anyone placed in a context of scarcity would likely experience these psychological shifts. It is an environmental reaction, not a character flaw. Second, psychology is not the only factor. Institutional failures, corruption, and lack of infrastructure remain massive hurdles. However, psychology is a piece of the puzzle that has been ignored for too long. Part I. Does money buy happiness? For a long time, Western culture held a somewhat condescending view of the happy poor. The idea that people in developing nations, unburdened by modern materialism, were content simply sitting under palm trees. With better data, we now know this is a myth. The correlation. The best modern science shows a stark correlation. Rich people are happier than poor people, and rich countries are happier on average than poor countries. Furthermore, the poor are disproportionately more likely to suffer from stress and clinical depression. The causation. The give directly experiment. Correlation, however, is not causation. To prove that a lack of money causes unhappiness, we need an experiment. Since we cannot ethically make people poor, researchers did the opposite. They made people richer. Working with a charity called Give Directly in Kenya, researchers conducted a massive RCT involving 120 villages and 1,500 households. Give Directly facilitates unconditional cash transfers, UCTs. This means they take donations and transfer significant sums of money to poor households with absolutely no strings attached. The recipients can spend the money on whatever they choose: roof repairs, school fees, food, or even alcohol. The philosophy is simple: treat the poor like adults who know their own needs best. In this study, households received an average of $700. In rural Kenya, this is an astronomical sum, equivalent to roughly 2 years of per capita income. Researchers returned a year later to measure the impact. The findings, the results, were unequivocal. Households that received the transfers were significantly happier and reported higher life satisfaction than the control group. They showed lower levels of stress and depression. Remarkably, for those receiving the largest transfers, researchers found a biological reduction in cortisol, the primary stress hormone. This was not just people saying they felt better. Their bodies were physically less stressed. The vice myth. And what of Uncle George's fear that the poor will waste money on alcohol and tobacco? The data proved him wrong again. There was no significant increase in spending on temptation goods. When people are given a chance to improve their lives, they typically make prudent investments in nutrition, assets, and their children. The lottery counter-argument. At this point, a skeptic might point to the infamous stories of lottery winners who go bankrupt and end up miserable. This is a classic case of availability heuristic. We remember the spectacular failures because they make the news. However, comprehensive studies on lottery winners show that, on average, they are indeed happier and more financially stable than non-winners. The tragic cases are outliers, not the rule. Part 2. The feedback loop. Having established that poverty causes psychological distress, we must examine the second half of the trap. Does this distress keep people poor? 1. The cost of stress. Impatience. Stress is an evolutionary response designed for immediate survival, not long-term planning. When the brain is flooded with cortisol, it shifts into fight or flight mode. Psychological research indicates that high stress levels make human beings significantly more impatient. In an economic context, impatience is devastating. Escaping poverty requires long-term orientation. Saving money, investing in fertilizer for next year's harvest, paying for preventative health care, or keeping a child in school for a return that is years away. If poverty creates chronic stress, and chronic stress forces the brain to focus only on the immediate present, the poor are structurally disadvantaged in making the very decisions that could lift them out of poverty. 2. The paralysis of depression. Beyond simple stress, poverty often leads to clinical depression. Depression is not merely feeling sad, It is a debilitating condition that affects motivation, energy, and cognition. For a wealthy individual, depression is terrible, but they often have a safety net, sick leave, savings, or family support. For a poor farmer or laborer, if depression makes it impossible to get out of bed, the consequences are immediate and catastrophic. Their crops die, their daily wages vanish, and their children do not eat. Depression acts as a capacity constraint. Even if you give a depressed person information about the returns on education, they may lack the hope or agency to act on it. This silent epidemic of depression among the global poor is a massive, invisible anchor dragging down economic development, breaking the cycle. The future of aid. If the psychological poverty trap is real, a feedback loop where poverty causes stress and stress enforces poverty, how do we break it? We have two potential points of intervention. Targeting the poverty, the economic lever. We know this works. The Give Directly study showed that cash transfers not only improved happiness, but also improved economic outcomes. Recipients had more assets, better consumption, and grew their businesses. Money fixes the economy and the mind. Targeting the psychology, the mental lever. This is the new frontier. Can we treat poverty by treating the mind? There are now low-cost, scalable forms of psychotherapy that can be delivered by trained laypeople in developing communities. These have been proven effective in treating depression. The burning question for the next generation of economists is, does psychotherapy have economic side effects? If we cure a farmer's depression, does his harvest yield increase? If we reduce a mother's stress, does she become a better financial planner? Studies are currently underway to answer this question. If the answer is yes, it could revolutionize how we view foreign aid. Psychotherapy could cease to be seen merely as a medical intervention and start being viewed as an economic development tool, a way to unlock human potential that has been stifled by the crushing mental weight of scarcity. Conclusion. So, the next time you find yourself at that dinner table with Uncle George, you are armed with the facts. Money does buy happiness, especially for those who have none. Poverty is not just a lack of cash. It is a psychological burden that physically alters the body and restricts the mind, impatience and depression. But there is reason for optimism. We have proven tools like direct cash transfers that work, and we are on the cusp of discovering new tools that address the mental toll of poverty. By understanding that the poor are not different people, but simply people in a different situation, we can design better policies that respect their dignity, alleviate their stress, and ultimately offer a real path out of the trap. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any videos. See you soon.